In December 1971, a 17-year-old German girl named Juliane Koepcke boarded Lancer Flight 508 in Lima, Peru, heading home for Christmas. 92 people were on that plane. 25 minutes into the flight, lightning struck the aircraft at 21,000 feet. The plane disintegrated in mid-air. Juliane fell 2 miles through the sky, still strapped to her seat, into the Amazon rainforest. She was the sole survivor. Then her real ordeal began. 11 days alone in the jungle with a broken collarbone, one eye swollen shut, and no survival training except what she'd learned from her parents. What happened next defies every probability. Christmas Eve 1971 started as a happy day for Juliane Koepcke. She was 17 years old, finishing her final year at a German high school in Lima, Peru. Her parents were zoologists who ran a research station deep in the Peruvian Amazon. Juliane had grown up between two worlds, the modern city of Lima and the primitive jungle research station where her parents studied wildlife. She was flying home to spend Christmas with her father at the research station. Her mother, Maria Koepcke, was traveling with her. They'd taken Lancer Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188A Electra turboprop, because it was the only flight available on Christmas Eve. Other flights were fully booked. The flight was scheduled to be routine, Lima to Pucallpa, about an hour of flying time, crossing over the Andes Mountains and then the Amazon rainforest. Juliane sat in a window seat in row 19F, her mother beside her. The plane carried 86 passengers and 6 crew members, mostly Peruvians heading home for the holiday. 25 minutes after takeoff, at approximately 12:50 p.m., the plane entered a severe thunderstorm. The turbulence was immediate and violent. The aircraft shook so hard that passengers were thrown against their seatbelts. Lightning flashed continuously outside the windows. The engines whined as pilots struggled to maintain control. Juliane looked out her window and saw something that terrified her. One of the engines was on fire. "That's the end," her mother said quietly beside her. Those were the last words Maria Koepcke ever spoke. A lightning strike hit the plane's right-wing fuel tank. The explosion tore the wing off. The aircraft broke apart at 21,000 feet altitude, disintegrating into pieces that tumbled through the sky toward the rainforest below. Juliane's last memory of being on the plane was looking down and seeing the jungle canopy spinning below her, getting closer. She was still strapped into her seat, still in row 19, but the row of seats had been ripped from the aircraft. She was falling through the sky in a seat, tumbling end over end, plummeting towards certain death. Then everything went black. Juliane woke up on the forest floor the next morning, Christmas Day, still strapped to her seat. The seat row had landed in the jungle, somehow cushioned by dense canopy and possibly by the seat acting as a crude parachute during the fall. She was alive. Impossibly, miraculously, she was alive after falling 2 miles from the sky. But the situation was still desperate. Juliane had a broken collarbone. She could feel the bone grinding when she moved her right arm. Her right eye was swollen completely shut. She had a deep gash in her calf. Various cuts and bruises covered her body. Her glasses were gone, and she was severely nearsighted without them. She was wearing a short-sleeved mini dress and white sandals, Christmas Eve party clothes, completely inappropriate for jungle survival. She had no supplies, no food, no water, no equipment of any kind. And she was alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, the Amazon rainforest, during rainy season. Juliane called out for her mother. No response. She searched the immediate area, finding debris from the plane, twisted metal, torn seats, scattered luggage. But no other survivors, no bodies that she could see. The truth that she was completely alone began to sink in. But Juliane had one advantage that most people in her situation wouldn't have. She'd grown up in the jungle. Her parents' research station was in the Amazon, and she'd spent months there over the years. Her father had taught her jungle survival skills, not as formal training, but through casual lessons during their time together. "If you're ever lost in the jungle," her father had told her once, "find water and follow it downstream. Water flows toward rivers, rivers flow toward settlements. Follow the water, and you'll find people eventually. Juliane found a small stream nearby. She began walking downstream, using the water as her guide. The Amazon rainforest is not a friendly environment. It's one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, which means it's full of things that can hurt you. Jaguars, caimans, anacondas, poisonous frogs, venomous snakes, parasitic insects, diseases. The list of threats is enormous. Juliane was nearly blind without her glasses, wearing party clothes that provided no protection, injured and alone. By any reasonable assessment, she should have died within 24 hours. But she didn't die. She walked. The first day was the hardest psychologically. Juliane had to accept that no immediate rescue was coming, that her mother was almost certainly dead, that she was truly alone. She cried while she walked, grief and fear overwhelming her, but she kept walking. One foot in front of the other, following the stream, moving downstream. The stream was often waist-deep or deeper. Juliane waded through it rather than walking alongside because the jungle was too dense to move through easily. Walking in the water also protected her from some insects and gave her something to drink, though she knew drinking untreated jungle water risked disease. At night, she couldn't see anything without her glasses and in the darkness. She'd find a spot on the bank, try to make herself as comfortable as possible, and wait for dawn. She couldn't sleep much. The jungle is incredibly loud at night with insect and animal sounds. Every noise made her think something was approaching to attack her. Days blurred together. Juliane's injuries worsened. The cut on her calf became infected. She could see maggots in the wound, fly larvae that had been laid in the open flesh. Her broken collarbone made moving her right arm agonizing. Her swollen eye never fully opened. She had nothing to eat except candy she'd found in a pack of mints in her pocket, a small gift she'd been carrying for Christmas. The candy lasted 2 days. After that, she had no food at all. Hunger became a constant companion. Juliane knew there was food in the jungle. Her parents had taught her which plants and insects were edible, but without her glasses, she couldn't identify plants with certainty. Eating the wrong thing could kill her faster than starvation. On the 4th day, she found more plane debris. A section of the fuselage had crashed through the canopy and landed near the stream. Juliane approached it carefully, hoping to find supplies or survivors. She found bodies instead. 3 women still strapped in their seats, dead from the impact. Juliane recognized one of them, a woman who'd been sitting near her and her mother on the plane. Juliane checked for pulses, knowing it was futile but needing to be certain. All dead. She searched the area for supplies, finding nothing useful. Then she continued walking, traumatized by seeing the bodies but knowing she couldn't help them. The psychological impact of this discovery was profound. Juliane now knew with certainty that she was likely the only survivor. If others had survived the crash, they weren't near her location. She was truly alone. By day 6, Juliane's wound infection was severe. The maggots in her calf had multiplied. She could smell the infection, a sickly sweet odor that indicated tissue death. She knew from her parents' teaching that infected wounds could kill through sepsis if not treated. She had no medical supplies, no antiseptic, no bandages, nothing. She tried washing the wound in stream water, but that only did so much. The maggots actually worried her more than the infection. Her father had once told her about botfly larvae that burrow into wounds and eat healthy tissue. She couldn't tell if the maggots in her wound were the relatively benign kind that only eat dead flesh, or the dangerous kind that eat living tissue. Either way, she couldn't reach the wound well enough to remove them. The infection and maggots would have to wait until she found help. On day 7, Juliane's stream joined a larger stream, which eventually became a small river. She was following her father's advice. Water flows downhill, streams join rivers, rivers lead to people. But the river was wider, deeper, faster. Juliane had to swim parts of it, her broken collarbone sending shooting pains through her body with every stroke. The current was strong enough to be dangerous. If she lost her footing in the wrong spot, she could be swept away and drowned. She saw caimans, South American crocodilians, basking on the riverbanks. They watched her pass with their cold reptilian eyes, but didn't attack. Juliane's father had taught her that caimans rarely attack humans unprovoked, but their presence was still terrifying. On day 9, Juliane began hallucinating from hunger, dehydration, and infection. She saw her mother walking beside her in the river. She saw rescue helicopters that disappeared when she looked directly at them. She heard voices calling her name that couldn't possibly be real. She knew these were hallucinations, symptoms of her deteriorating physical condition. But knowing something isn't real doesn't make it less convincing when you're delirious. She kept walking. What else could she do? On the morning of day 10, January 3rd, 1972, Juliane found something that made her cry with relief: a boat. It was a small canoe tied to the riverbank, next to a palm-thatched shelter. This meant people were nearby, hunters or loggers who used this location as a camp. The shelter had a tarp roof and contained some basic supplies. Juliane collapsed in the shelter, too exhausted to walk further. She'd made it. She'd found people, or at least evidence of people. She just had to wait for them to return. She found a small engine motor under the shelter and remembered something her father had taught her. Gasoline can be used to clean wounds because it eliminates bacteria and parasites. She found fuel in a can next to the motor. Juliane poured gasoline directly into her infected calf wound. The pain was indescribable. The gasoline burned like acid, but it worked. Dozens of maggots began crawling out of the wound, driven out by the chemical. Juliane pulled them out with her fingers, counting 35 maggots in total that had been living in her leg. After cleaning the wound as best she could, Juliane lay down in the shelter and waited. Hours passed. Then she heard voices, men speaking Spanish, approaching the shelter. 3 Peruvian loggers emerged from the jungle, returning to their camp after a day of work. They stopped dead when they saw Juliane, a young white woman in a tattered dress, covered in injuries, lying in their shelter. They thought she was a ghost or a hallucination, or possibly a water spirit from local mythology. "I'm real," Juliane told them in Spanish. "I was in a plane crash. Please help me." The men were understandably skeptical. Plane crash 10 days ago. How could anyone survive that? But Juliane's injuries were obviously real, and she desperately needed help. The loggers gave her food, canned food from their supplies, which Juliane's shrunken stomach could barely handle. They cleaned her wounds better than she'd been able to. They gave her clean clothes to replace her ruined dress. The next morning, they transported her 7 hours down the river by canoe to a lumber station with better facilities. From there, she was flown by small plane to Koepcke, then to a hospital in Lima. News of Juliane's survival shocked the world. A 17-year-old girl survives a plane crash from 21,000 feet, then survives 11 days alone in the Amazon rainforest. It seemed impossible. Media descended on the hospital, demanding interviews. But Juliane was focused on one question: had anyone else survived? The answer was devastating. Of the 92 people on Lancer Flight 508, Juliane was the sole survivor. Everyone else, including her mother, had died in the crash or from injuries shortly after. Search crews found other bodies scattered across miles of jungle. The plane had broken apart so completely that debris was spread over a huge area. Some bodies were found still strapped in seats, having fallen through the sky like Juliane. But only Juliane had the combination of luck and survival skills necessary to live. Her mother's body was found several weeks later, still strapped in her seat, about a mile from where Juliane had landed. Maria Koepcke had survived the fall initially but died from injuries before she could seek help. Juliane had been calling for her that first morning, not knowing her mother was dead nearby. This knowledge haunted Juliane for years. If she'd searched in a different direction, could she have found her mother alive? Could she have helped her survive? Psychologists later told Juliane that this guilt was irrational. Her mother's injuries were too severe, and Juliane herself was barely able to walk. There was nothing she could have done. But knowing something intellectually doesn't eliminate emotional guilt. Juliane recovered physically over the following months. Her broken collarbone healed. The infection in her leg was treated with antibiotics. Her eye swelling went down. she got new glasses. But the psychological recovery took years. Juliane suffered from nightmares, survivor's guilt, and what would now be diagnosed as PTSD. She'd lost her mother, survived an impossible situation, and was suddenly famous for a tragedy she'd rather forget. She returned to Germany to finish school, then studied biology at the University of Kiel, following in her parents' footsteps. She earned her doctorate in zoology, specializing in Peruvian birds. In some ways, continuing her parents' scientific work was how she processed the trauma. Juliane eventually returned to Peru and took over management of her parents' jungle research station, the same station she'd been flying to on that Christmas Eve in 1971. She spent much of her adult life in the Amazon, studying and protecting the ecosystem that nearly killed her. In interviews over the years, Juliane has been remarkably composed about her experience. She doesn't dramatize it or claim to be a hero. She attributes her survival to a combination of luck, landing in trees that cushioned her fall, and the practical knowledge her parents had given her. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said repeatedly. "I just walked downstream and didn't give up." Anyone with the same knowledge could have done it. This modesty is characteristic of Juliane, but experts in survival disagree with her self-assessment. The psychological strength required to keep walking for 11 days, injured and alone, is extraordinary. Many people would have simply sat down and waited to die. The physics of Juliane's survival are still debated. How does someone survive a fall from 21,000 feet? The most likely explanation is that she remained strapped to a row of seats that acted as a crude parachute, slowing her fall somewhat. She also landed in dense jungle canopy that further cushioned the impact, with branches breaking her fall gradually rather than hitting the ground directly. It was a series of incredibly unlikely events. If she'd been in a different part of the plane, if she'd hit ground instead of trees, if the seat hadn't stayed intact, if the canopy hadn't been dense enough, any of these factors change and Juliane dies. But she didn't die. Against astronomical odds, the 17-year-old girl survived both the crash and the jungle. Lancer, the airline, went out of business shortly after the crash. The investigation revealed that the airline had been operating with safety violations, flying planes in dangerous weather conditions and ignoring maintenance requirements. Lancer Flight 508 shouldn't have flown into that thunderstorm. The pilots were pressured to stay on schedule despite dangerous weather. For Juliane, this knowledge added anger to her grief. Her mother had died because an airline prioritized schedules over safety. 92 people were killed by corporate negligence, but she chose not to let anger consume her. Instead, she honored her parents' memory by continuing their scientific work and by speaking publicly about survival and resilience. In 1998, Juliane returned to the crash site for the first time since 1971, accompanied by filmmaker Werner Herzog, who had ironically been booked on the same flight, but changed his plans at the last minute. The visit was emotional and cathartic, confronting the place where she'd lost her mother and nearly died herself. They found remnants of the plane still in the jungle, twisted metal, seat fragments, pieces of the aircraft that had become part of the forest. Nature was slowly reclaiming everything, covering evidence of the disaster with vegetation. Juliane is now in her 60s, still working in Peru, still studying the Amazon ecosystem. She's written a book about her experience, When I Fell from the Sky, that provides her perspective on the crash and its aftermath. The book is notable for its lack of sensationalism. Juliane doesn't claim to have fought off jaguars or battled anacondas. She walked through the jungle, followed a stream, and survived through knowledge and determination. The truth is dramatic enough without embellishment. Modern survival experts study Juliane's case as an example of proper decision-making under extreme stress. She made the right choice immediately: follow water downstream. She managed her limited resources carefully. She kept moving despite injuries and fear. She didn't panic. These seem like simple decisions, but they're incredibly difficult to make when you're 17 years old, injured, grieving, and alone in a hostile environment. Most people would have made fatal mistakes. Juliane didn't. The Amazon jungle where Juliane survived is still there, still dangerous, still claiming lives. People get lost in that jungle regularly. Experienced explorers with proper equipment have died there. That a teenage girl in party clothes survived 11 days alone remains remarkable. Juliane Koepcke fell from the sky on Christmas Eve 1971 and survived. Then she survived the jungle. Then she survived the grief, the trauma, the guilt, and the unwanted fame. She rebuilt her life, honored her parents' legacy, and became a respected scientist in her own right. She's the girl who fell from the sky and walked out of hell. And she did it by putting one foot in front of the other, following water downstream, and refusing to give up. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting or being extraordinary. Sometimes it's about basic decisions, practical knowledge, and the stubborn refusal to stop moving forward. Juliane Koepcke survived because she knew what to do and had the strength to do it, even when everything seemed hopeless. That's the real miracle. Not that she survived the fall, but that she survived everything that came after.